What a huge honor to be here today. Thank you. My name is Danica, and I'm here to talk about how we can start a movement that can change the world. But we'll start from the beginning. Have you ever thought about what you've learned and who taught you? My parents are teachers, so I get to think about this kind of stuff all the time, because it's a really interesting opportunity to grow up in a household where people's mantra seems to be something like, how can I help you understand and grow? My parents are special ed teachers, so they also took some time to teach me how to think outside the box and to appreciate people who are different than me. And if any of you have ever had the opportunity of knowing somebody who's been labeled different, then you know what I'm talking about. There's something magical about hanging out with somebody who sees the world through a different lens. And that label is completely inadequate to explain who they actually are. I have a couple inadequate labels. Currently, my favorite one is ADHD. Actually, last week somebody called me ADHD HD, which means attention deficit and hyperactive in high definition. I know, right? Surprise! I actually laughed when they said it, because somehow I grew up knowing that my brain isn't broken, it's special. It's not a disability to be able to think in all of these systems at once and to want to move my body. It's actually one of my greatest and most extraordinary abilities. I call it my superpower. Thank you. And I think it's part of who I am. And I really wish that every kid grew up knowing that they were special, and that if somebody came by and stuck a label on them, it won't define who they are in this world. And I started really challenging labels when I was 20, and somebody asked me why Band-Aids came in my skin color. I had never thought of it before. And I didn't have an answer. And the farther I got into it, the more I really didn't like what I was finding. Because as it turns out, the same system that would enable somebody to think that there was one primary or normal color was actually part of our entire society's building blocks. It's nested in there in how we run our businesses and how we run our school systems, our hospitals, the whole gamut. It did help me, though. It did help me to realize some of my past experiences and why I hadn't been able to fit in. Because even though my parents had taught me some of the tools to sort of navigate my superpower and get through the school system, I had always kind of been this outsider in some ways. Because I could walk in and I could look the part, but as soon as I opened my mouth, I became the other. And other is a really interesting label, because there's something about it that's incredibly freeing. Unless, of course, you want to be a part of something. Okay, so you want like a community that you can actually connect with. And then you're on the outside, and other is this limiting wall. And I felt really alone out there until I started talking to other people, and I realized I wasn't the only one who was getting shut out by the system. As a matter of fact, I realized there were a lot of people out there who understood what I was talking about, and we were all kind of wandering around alone. And it didn't make any sense to me, because I thought, well, God, we'll just go talk to the people in charge of the systems, because if they knew that voices wouldn't be heard, surely they'd understand that maybe there was some kid out there with a cure for cancer that wasn't being heard. Maybe there was a voice and a vision that could actually change our world and make it a better place. Naive. When I started looking into how to speak even louder, I learned the power of a system that's built to silence. But it also made me really curious. And I started asking the simple questions. Like, why don't we just eat healthier and live healthier so that we don't have to spend all of our money on medical bills? And if we really want to be at home with our families doing the things we love, why don't we just make time to do that? And how am I supposed to be an effective contributing citizen when the two biggest assets that you're measuring me by are the shape of my body and the size of my bank account? And when I started putting all of those questions together with the things I already knew about the world, things I knew about global warming and fossil fuels and human trafficking and hunger and homelessness, I became completely overwhelmed. And if you've ever met anybody with my superpower in high definition, you know that it takes a lot to make us sit still, but I was absolutely there in shock. And in my silence, I heard the word of Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in the world. And for the first time, I understood them. Be the change you wish to see in the world. He was talking to me. I couldn't just like what somebody else was doing on Facebook. I couldn't show up every 4 years and check a ballot box and hope that somebody would speak my truth in some far distant land. I couldn't hope like I could be that little princess in some fairy tale where there was going to be a prince on a white horse coming in to save me. I needed to be the change. But then there was a problem with that because I couldn't even imagine what that change would look like. What would the world look like without borders and boxes and boundaries? And so I started looking for role models. And if you ever take this challenge, don't start with mainstream media. They have a whole different vision of this world. You've got to dig a little bit deeper. And I did. And I found them. I found the dream makers and the change makers. And I found publishers who were telling the true story about the chemical warfare in our food system and in our medical systems. And I found out about people who were hosting workshops in their backyards to teach how you could grow your own natural food and your own medicinal herbs so that you wouldn't have to find out what next week was going to look like by calling the pharmaceutical company and wondering what side effects your pills were going to give you. And I heard stories about people who were having honest discussions about racism and sexism and discrimination, and they were talking about silencing, and they weren't letting anybody else use their voice. And that is step number one. We have to fill our heads with dreams. We can't have these tiny little whispers floating around in there. We need to be overflowing with imagination and inspiration and dreams. And the stories of the people who are already doing it in the food systems, in the water systems, in society, and out there in nature. We need to be able to visualize what that change could actually look like so that we can take step two. We want to be the change. And right then, when I sort of figured it out, there's my answer. There's this thing called synchronicity. And synchronicity will sort of lay out this next step for you if you're ever ready to take it. And I found my next step when I met this family. And in first glance, they looked like a lot of other families I'd met. 2 parents living in a house with a kid. And then I looked closer, and I looked into the eyes of this little girl, and she had big blue eyes that could melt my heart every time she blinked. And I looked a little bit closer, and I started asking about this story. And this little girl was not 3.5 like I had thought she was. She was about to turn 6, but she had stopped growing because she had a disease that was killing her. And she was going to die if she didn't get a kidney. And in this household was a father who had committed his kidney to his little girl. And while they were waiting for her to just grow up, just enough to that size that she was right then, they actually found 2 forms of cancer in his body. And I heard this story from the mom. A mom who wakes up every morning and doles out 2 dishes of pills, one pile to save her child's life and one to save her husband's. And then she goes to work. She does whatever she can all day long to make sure that they can raise enough money and have enough money so that they have a home to come home to and a car to race down to the hospital. And she does get in that car, and she races the husband and she races the child down there anytime they get sick. And I found out actually that she was racing around to that hospital on her free time too, because she was testing to see if she could be the donor for that daughter. Now, to me, that sounds like she's carrying the weight of the world. And then I knew what kind of change I wanted to be. I wanted to let her know that she didn't have to carry it alone, that I would be part with her, and that I would be strong enough. And I asked her if she would let me be a part of their story, and she said yes. So I called my friends, and I asked them if they would join us. And they called their friends. And we all sat together around in this big circle, and we didn't know where to start. And I said, well, everyone has a gift. What is yours? And to be honest, some people didn't even know what their gift was. They're like, yeah, you know what? I've been doing the same thing over and over, and I just don't feel like there's anything very special about me. But I'll give you some time. And if you can give me a list, then maybe I'll just run some errands for the team. And other people knew right away what their gift was. There were some bands that said, hey, I'm a talented musician. I know other talented musicians. Let's build a music festival, and we'll invite everybody to come and play. And then some other people said, well, I'm a designer. You know, I can design a website, I can design your t-shirts and your posters. And then somebody raised their hand and said, well, we've got printers. And this snowball effect started to kind of keep rolling. So all of a sudden they were calling the fire department. We want to buy all your food, and we want to cook the food and donate all of the money for you. And the machinist union calls, and the sanitation department calls, and they all want to donate and they want to help. And everybody had their gifts to give. Even the kids showed up to help. And in the middle of this whole story, the mom's test came back, and she wasn't a match. She couldn't donate a kidney to her daughter. And then I knew what one of my gifts was to give. So we had this big music festival and this fundraiser, and we raised enough money to send 2 people down to Seattle to do a kidney transplant. And in the morning, when I woke up with one less kidney, they told me that Olivia was having the healthiest day of her entire life so far. And I felt overwhelmed with gratitude, thinking about the entire community that helped make this dream come true and keep this child alive. I can never tell this story without crying. Not even in rehearsal. And I know it's coming. It's like watching the Titanic and crying every time. I don't get it. So I wanted to start calling the community members and be like, wow, you saved a life. And I reached for my phone and it was already like ringing off the hook. And these people were calling me. And before I could even speak my gratitude, they were saying, thank you. I had forgotten that my life had a purpose. I had gotten stuck in this rat race, the same drive every day, the same seat, the same desk, and I had forgotten that my life had anything to offer the people around me, or that those people who were my neighbors even cared about what was going on. And I got a call from Mom, and she said, we have been trying to teach our kids about self-sacrifice and giving, and nothing was working. And we told them Olivia's stories, and they ran to their bedrooms, and they got their piggy banks, and they came out, and they said, we have this to give. Can you please save this little girl's life? And I got calls from people who had been in abusive relationships. And they said, Danica, I'm walking out today because I want to be more than somebody's doormat. And that's when I learned two things that I think are going to change this world. One, we all have something to give. Those labels do not define who we are. And two, people want to be a part of something more meaningful than themselves. So, my team and I have been developing this program. And it basically walks through the steps. And we believe it is the empowering program that'll help solve some of these problems we see. But we also believe that we are not the only ones with answers. There are so many problems out there. But I came here today because I believe that I know who has those answers. It's you. I believe that there are visionaries out there right now that have seen a social problem and they have created a solution to it. And I believe that if you go out there and you tell your story, right around the corner will be somebody who has the gift of being a good listener, and they will hear you and they will help you hold on to your dreams. Because soon, the heavy lifters and the hard workers and the believers will show up, and together you will make a movement that will change this world. I believe that we are the change. And so my final question for you is, what is your gift to give? Thank you.